All right, today we are diving into a pretty radical idea, one that comes from a deep analysis of Surah Ar-Raʿd, verse 28. What if I told you the universe isn't silent? Not at all. The argument we're going to unpack today suggests that everything, and I mean everything, from the most distant galaxies right down to the atoms in your hand, is in a constant, conscious state of praise. So let's just jump right into the deep end with a question that really gets to the heart of it. Can a stone, just a plain old rock, actually praise God? Is that booming sound of thunder a literal act of worship? Now, I know these questions might sound a little out there, but they're the key. They force us to start thinking about the universe in a way we probably never have before. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll tackle this big question. Is this all just a poetic metaphor, or is it talking about a literal reality? Then we'll get into the philosophical side of things, the idea that just existing is a form of praise. After that, we'll look at the specific evidence the source uses to back this up. From there, we'll need to understand a really crucial distinction between two different kinds of worship. And finally, we'll see how all of these pieces fit together to paint a picture of a universe that is fully perceiving and aware. Sound good? Let's dive in. All right, first things first. We have to get our heads around the foundational claim that the source text is making. And it's a big one. The author is arguing that when the Quran mentions creation praising God, it's not just using some beautiful, poetic language. Nope, this isn't a metaphor. It's being presented as a straight-up metaphysical reality. And the key concept, the word we really need to understand, is tasbih. Now, you'll often see it translated simply as glorification or praise, but its root meaning is so much more precise than that. It's really the act of declaring God's absolute perfection and transcendence, saying that he is completely, totally free from any flaw, any limitation, any kind of partner. It's a declaration of ultimate perfection. And the argument here is that this declaration is the fundamental, ongoing activity of the entire universe. Okay, this right here is where the argument really pivots away from the common understanding. See, most people would read this and think, okay, it's a metaphor. The universe, with all its incredible order and beauty, is like a beautiful poem that praises its author. It points back to a creator. Makes sense, right? But the author we're looking at says, no, that's not it. They completely reject the symbolic interpretation. Instead, they argue this is a literal, ontological event. And ontological just means it has to do with the very nature of existence itself. So the universe isn't just acting as if it's praising God. It literally is praising God. This isn't poetry, it's a claim about how reality actually works. So if it's not a metaphor, what is it? Well, this next piece of the puzzle takes us right to the philosophical core of the argument, which is this. The very act of existing is, in and of itself, a form of praise. So here's the logic behind that, this central pillar of this ontological argument. It goes like this. Anything that exists, right, is what philosophers call contingent, meaning it didn't create itself. So if it didn't create itself, it must be a creation, and as a creation, it naturally acts like a mirror, reflecting the qualities of its creator. You know, just like a beautiful painting reflects the skill of the artist, or a complex engine reflects the genius of its engineer. The argument is that in the exact same way, every single atom, just by existing, by having a structure, by following certain laws, is a constant testament to the power, the knowledge, and the artistry of its maker. And that constant, built-in testimony, that is its tasbih. And we can see this idea reflected directly in the verse that started this whole discussion. Look very closely at the language here. It doesn't say that the thunder reminds us of God's power, or that it's a symbol of his majesty. No, it says, and the thunder exalts with praise of him. The grammar actually gives agency, a sense of action, to the thunder itself. It's framed as an active participant, not just some passive symbol. And for the author, this very specific linguistic choice is crucial evidence that we're talking about literal praise, not a metaphor. Okay, so if creation is actively praising, the next logical question is, where's the proof? What evidence does the source point to? Well, this is where we get into the Quranic verses that the author uses to argue that things we don't think of as human actually have a capacity for perception and even testimony. The first line of evidence actually comes from descriptions of the Day of Judgment. So in this verse, it says that a person's own hearing, their sight, and even their skin will testify against them about what they did. Now think about that for a second. The key point the author makes is that these things, your skin, your eyes, are treated like separate conscious witnesses. They're not just passive data recorders like a camera. They're given the ability to speak. This is huge because it sets a precedent within the Quranic framework that things we don't consider to be conscious can in fact have the capacity to perceive and to testify. And this isn't a one-off idea. It gets reinforced again here. Hands will speak to us, and their feet will bear witness. So again, we have body parts that we normally think of as just tools under our control, and they're described as having the ability to communicate and give truthful testimony. You can see how the author is building a case, piece by piece. And if we look at the source text itself, we can see the logical jump the author makes. It's basically an argument by analogy. It goes like this. Premise 1. The Quran says that our own limbs, things we think of as just tools of our will, can perceive and testify. So, conclusion 2. If that's true, then it's not a huge leap to conclude that other things we consider inanimate, like stones or mountains or thunder, also have some form of perception and consciousness that's appropriate for what they are. And what is their function in this framework? Constant, ongoing tasbih.
Okay, but this brings up a pretty obvious question, a potential paradox, right? If absolutely everything is glorifying God, then what about a person who doesn't believe? Or what about a rock that's been carved into an idol and is being worshipped? How can that be in a state of praise? Well, this next section introduces a really critical distinction that is designed to solve that exact problem.
Now, this is the absolute linchpin of the entire argument. This is how the paradox gets resolved. The author introduces two distinct forms of tasbih. On one side, you have tasbih takwini. That word, takwini, comes from the root for to exist or to be. So this is that ontological praise we talked about, the praise something gives just by existing. It's universal and it's unavoidable. Nothing can disobey it. Then on the other side, you have tasbih tashri'i. Tashri'i is related to divine law. This is the choice-based worship that's required of beings who have free will, like humans, and this is the kind that can be accepted or rejected. And here's how that distinction clears everything up. A rock, just by being a rock and obeying the laws of physics, is in a perfect state of tasbih takwini. It's doing exactly what it was created to do. A human, just by being a biological creature, is also performing that same tasbih takwini. But, and this is the key, humans have an additional layer of responsibility. So when a believer chooses to pray, they're performing tasbih tashridi. A person who disbelieves or that rock carved into an idol is still at the most fundamental atomic level performing tasbih takwini. They are still existing according to the Creator's design, but their actions or their form are in a state of rebellion against the tashri'i, the legislated worship. So everything praises in one way, but only those with free will can choose to disobey in another. Okay, so let's pull all of these threads together. We've moved from seeing this as a simple metaphor to a literal reality. We've explored the idea that just existing is a form of praise. We've looked at the evidence for a testifying creation, and we've untangled the crucial difference between the two forms of worship. All of this has been building towards the author's really profound final conclusion.
And the entire argument really comes down to this one single powerful Arabic word, shuur.
So what is shuur? It basically means a level of perception, of awareness or consciousness. And the author's ultimate conclusion is that every single particle of creation has a degree of shuur that is perfectly suited to its own level of being. A stone's awareness isn't like a plant's, and a plant's isn't like an animal's, and so on. But it's this built-in, tiered consciousness that takes the whole idea of tasbih takwini, that praise of existence, and elevates it from just being a blind mechanical process into a knowing, conscious act of praise, performed by everything according to its own ability. So the big takeaway here is a completely different way of seeing the cosmos. In this worldview, the universe isn't just some inert, dead backdrop for the drama of human life. It's not just dead matter being pushed around by blind forces. Instead, it's a dynamic, living reality just filled with perception. Every single part of it is an active participant, constantly engaged in a meaningful communication, a tasbih with its creator. And that leaves us with one final, pretty profound question to think about. If you were to accept this worldview, even just as a thought experiment, the idea that every object, every gust of wind, every clap of thunder has its own form of consciousness and is actively praising, how would that change the way you interact with the world around you? What does it really mean to live in a universe that isn't just alive, but is in a constant state of worship?